So sometimes in this shiur we deal with the HaOmer, especially when we approach Yemei Chag and Moyedei Yisrael, and sometimes it's about the weekly parsha. And today we have an opportunity to combine the two, because in Parsha Samai, one of the mitzvahs is Usfartem lechem b'mochas haShabbos miyoyim aviyachem esoyim elat nufo sheva shabosos tamimois tihiyeno. So we are right in the middle of Yemei HaSefira, 24 days, and it's this week's parsha. So the Gemara Samach Vav Amud Aleph, source number 3 on our sheet. Last line. Omer Abaye, mitzvah lemimne yomei, or mitzvah lemimne shavui. You need to have a double count. We count the days, we count the weeks. Rabbonan de Beit Avashi moni yomei v'moni shavui. Rabbonan de Beit Avashi did as Abaye dictated. Ameimar, moni yomei v'loi moni shavui. Omar, zechel amigdashu. And Maimon had a different opinion, and he says it's enough if we count the days. You don't need to count the weeks, and why not? Because it's Zechel HaMikdash. So what if it's Zechel HaMikdash? So what? So where is the source of the double count, both days and weeks? We actually have the mitzvah of Sefiras Weimer twice in Toras Moshe. Source number 1 on our sheet is this week's parsha. And I just want you to note at this stage, because soon we're going to come back to this observation, 2 different psukim. We just read Posek Tezvav, Posek Tezayin, Ad Mamachas HaShabbos HaShviyas Tispunu Chamishim Yoim, Ve'krafta Mincha Chodosho LaHashem. This is the source of Minyan HaYomim. Tisperu chamishim yaim. Parshas Re'ei in Mishnah Torah. Sheva Shavuos tisperachu. Mochel chamish bekomo. Tochel lispoil Sheva Shavuos. And this pasuk doesn't mention counting the days, only counting the weeks. So on source number 1, this week's parsha, we have both weeks and the days. So why do we need Parshas Re'ei to teach us the weeks? Not really. Because in the first posik Tezvav, Usfartem lechem b'mochas haShabbos miyoyim aviyachem esoyim elat nufo. What are we supposed to count? That's what this next posik teaches us. Tisperu chamishim yoyim. Sheva shabosos tamimois tihiyeno is not a command. It will be, the count will be Sheva shabosos. And this is the remez that Tisperu Chamish Yom is not really 50, it's 49. And that is Sheva Shabosos Tamimois Tihiyeno. So the question is, HaOmer says, you don't need to count weeks because it's Zechel HaMikdash. So what? But it's a mitzvah. Even though it's a mitzvah that Rabbanon, however, we have a big klal throughout Shas called the Tikkun Rabbanon Ken D'Oraisa Tikkun. And what is actually the machlokes between HaOmer and Abaye? What is the machlokes? Rashi on the spot is somewhat surprising. HaOmer, moni yomei v'loi moni shavia, Omar, hai minyone dehashta lav choivohu, du leka oimer, zechel hamikdash ba'alma, hilkach b'yomei sagi, lav choivohu. Rashi writes, it's not an obligation. Neither min haTorah nor min Rabbanon. Lav choivahu. It's not a choivo. Zechel hamikdash ba'alma. Rashi adds on one word. It's not only zechel hamikdash. Zechel lemikdash ba'alma. So, therefore, HaOmer says it's not a real mitzvah. It's not a total mitzvah. Lav choiva. So let me say this. There are 2 types of Zechel HaMikdash. Lulav begvulan kol shiva. The Gemara says in Sukkah Mem Dalad Medalef is Zechel HaMikdash. Min haTorah mitzvahs lulav 7 days is only in the Mikdash. Any other place in the world, the mitzvah d'oraisa is only the first day of Sukkah. So all the other days are midrabanan. Why will Chomer metaken lulav kol shiva in the entire world. That is called gvulin, chutz megvul hamikdash. Zeichel hamikdash. But it's still a mitzvah derabanan. And we say a bracha and lulav kol shiva. On the other hand, do you remember Zeichel HaMikdash? Another Zeichel HaMikdash? The most well-known Zeichel HaMikdash? Less than a month ago, we all said, B'leila Seder, Zeichel HaMikdash ki Hillel kein os Hillel b'zman shebeis HaMikdash Horikayim. We don't say a bracha and koirech. Koirech is not the same as lulav kol shiva b'gevulin. Lulav kol shiva is a mitzvah d'Rabbanan. And it makes no difference why HaOmer were metaken mitzvahs, whether it's Persum Anis or Zeichel HaMikdash or any other reason. And just like we say a brocha on Mikro Megillah, which is Midrabanan, Ner Chanukah is Derabanan, Ner Shabbos is Derabanan, we say a brocha on Lulav Kol Shiva. So mitzvah Derabanan, it makes no difference why HaOmer were metaken. Koirech, it's not really a mitzvah Derabanan. It's somewhat more of a Zecher Ba'alma. It's a Zecher to the minhag of Hillel. And therefore we don't say a brocha on koirech. So Rashi explaining a HaOmer, Rashi says, Lav choivoi. And it's only a Zecher HaMikdash Ba'alma. The Rambam Paskins, Perik Zayin, Aloha Chov Dalet, Midin V'Musofen, that Tzvius Woyme B'Zman Hazeh D'Uraisa. And according to the Rambam, Tzvius Woyme does not depend on Korban Omer. So what is clear in the Rambam, that is the machloikes between Abaye and HaOmer. Abaye says Tzvius Woyme is a mitzvah d'oraisa. So you definitely need to be Mekayim Tzvius Woyme in its fullest days plus weeks. HaOmer says it's only midrabanan. Tosfos, source number 6. Ran, source number 5. Rosh, source number 7. They all maintain Sefiras HaOmer b'zman hazeh midrabanan because Sefiras HaOmer depends on Korban Omer. When there is no Korban, there is no Sefira. So according to them, what would be the machlokes between HaOmer and Abaye? Abaye says Sefiras HaOmer is a Zeichel HaMikdash of the nature of lulav kol shiva. HaOmer says it's a Zeichel HaMikdash of the nature of koirech. Two different levels in Zeichel HaMikdash. According to Abaye, choiva, it definitely is a choiva, like any other mitzvah d'Rabbanan, like Ner Shabbos, like Eruv, like Mikra Megillah, like Ner Chanukah. These are mitzvahs, these are choiva. HaOmer, according to Rashi, lav choiva. It's not a Zeichel HaMikdash, it's a Zeichel HaMikdash ba'alma. So there are two different drochim in explaining the machlokes Abaye and HaOmer. Source number 8, we have the Rambam, but not the right one. This is Aloha Chov Beis, we need Aloha Chov Daled. In Aloha Chov Daled, the Rambam writes, Mitzvah zu noheges b'kol mokoim u'b'kol zman. B'kol mokoim u'b'kol zman. So even b'zman hazeh, it's a mitzvah d'oraisa. The Rambam, Sefer HaMitzvahs, once again. The Rambam deals with the question, Mitzvah l'mimni yoyim, mitzvah l'mimni shavoi. Are these two separate mitzvahs or one mitzvah? And the Rambam says you might make a mistake when you learn the Gemara. Abaye says, Mitzvah l'mimni yoyim, mitzvah l'mimni shavoi. You have a mitzvah to count the days and a mitzvah to count the weeks. You might think they are two separate mitzvahs. But the Rambam says no. In the list of Taryag, I dedicated only one slot for Sefiras HaOmer. It is one mitzvah, which has two parts. So the concept of Chelkei mitzvah is very well known in Sefer HaMitzvahs. Not every act, not every deed is a mitzvah b'fnei atzma. So the most relevant example would be korbanos. Korban chatas is one mitzvah. Korban oile is another mitzvah. And each of these mitzvahs of the korbanos includes Shlita, Kabbalah, Hoilocha, Zrikas Adam, Haktoras Eimerim, and these are not separate mitzvahs. It's not 5 mitzvahs, it's one. But the performance of this mitzvah, Kiyum mitzvah, requires an entire set of acts, starting with Shlita Sakorm, Kabbalah, Hoilocha, Zrika, Haktoras Eimerim, and all these are included in one mitzvah. Machloikes Rambam Ramban. Hafroshes Trumas Omaisis, and then you need to take the Trum and the Mais and give them to a Kohen and a Levi. Are these included in one mitzvah? That is the opinion of the Rambam, or 2 separate mitzvahs. So the Rambam says we need to count days and weeks, but don't make a mistake. These are not 2 separate mitzvahs, one mitzvah. And the Rambam proves that it's one mitzvah and not 2 from the fact we make one bracha. If it would be 2 separate mitzvahs, we would make 2 brachas. So how come we make one bracha and 2 mitzvahs? This proves it's one mitzvah, not 2. Let me ask you, Tefillin shel yad and Tefillin shel rosh, does anybody know 1 mitzvah or 2 mitzvahs? Mefurish in Menachos 2 mitzvahs, and in Rambam Sefer HaMitzvahs, mitzvahs that say Yud Gimel Yud Daled are Tefillin shel yad and Tefillin shel rosh. And he's found him here that only make 1 bracha on tefillin. So how many brachas do you make on tefillin in the morning? Why is that? Because that's a psak of the Shulchan Aruch, the Beis Yosef. Ashkenazim make 2 brachas because the Rosh says 2. Why does the Beis Yosef say 1? As usual, because the Rambam says 1. And why does the Ramo say 2? Because the Rosh says 2. So the Rambam, on one hand, maintains Tefillin shel yad, Tefillin shel rosh are 2 mitzvahs, and he himself says you want 1 bracha. So how does he prove from Sefiras HaOmer that it's 1 mitzvah because we say 1 bracha? And if it would be 2 mitzvahs, you would say 2 brachas. So why is it different than tefillin? That's a very relevant question. I'm not going to give you the answer now. It's written Barichus in Minchas Rosh HaMoedim Chelek Gimel. But in some way, we need to differentiate between the tefillin and Sefiras HaOmer. Maybe some of you could come up with a suggestion. What is the difference between tefillin? Afal pi, even the 2 mitzvahs, we say 1 bracha, and the Rambam maintains, if Sefiras Hayom and Sefiras Shavuos would be 2 mitzvahs, we would say 2 brachas. And why is that? Maybe it is because Tefillin shel and Tefillin shel rosh are 2 mitzvahs, but you're not allowed to make a hefsek between the 2. Asoch bein tefillah letefillah choyzeh ma'orchei hamelcha. And Chazal darshan that from a pasuk. Kshaltem lo yisrael yudecha v'orev tevez beinenecha. They always come together. And that is why, if the nature of this mitzvah, they're both tefillin and they both come together, we say 1 bracha. But if minyan hayomim and minyan shavuos are 2 separate mitzvahs, there is no reason that you need to be mekayim them both together. You could count the days 9 o'clock and then the weeks 10 o'clock, or the other way around. So the Rambam says if there are 2 unrelated mitzvahs, even though they're both counting and they both associate with the HaOmer, but there's no reason to do them together, then we would say 2 brachas. Masha ein kain b'tefillin. Everybody agrees, and that's a sugya mefareshes, you're not allowed to make a hefsek between tefillin shel yad and tefillin shel rosh, and that is not because of the bracha. The bracha is the Rabbanan, and that is a din Chazal darshan from the Torah. And Hayor Varach Alevov, going all back to Chumash, to Melchemes Midyan, sach bein tefillah letefillah. So maybe that would be the difference. Because it not necessarily must be 1 mitzvah, but the fact that you need to perform these 2 mitzvahs together. And it's mafurish menachos that these are 2 different mitzvahs, and they're not ma'akev one the other. If there would be 1 mitzvah, chelkei mitzvah are ma'akev. And that is a separate discussion, because one of the tinus of the Ramban against the Rambam, b'afroshes trumas amaisis, the Ramban argues, if afrosh and asidim would be 1 mitzvah, And if you weren't Mekayim Nesina, then you also weren't Mekayim Afrosha. And I wrote, maybe so. Maybe you weren't Mekayim Mitzvah Afrosha, but the Chaloisa Treme does not depend whether you were Mekayim a Mitzvah or not. Shnei Dinim. So according to the Rambam, if Afrosha and Nesina are one Mitzvah, Hamafresh V'loi Nosan will not get Sechar Mitzvah. But Afrosha is a Chalois. Still Afrosha. But we do maintain Chelkei Mitzvah Ma'akven Zeh Ezeh. And that's the difference between the two tefillin and Arba Kanfos. If you have 3 out of 4 Kanfos, you're not Mekayim a Mitzvah. And tzitzis is not a Chalois. And therefore you have an Aveda if you put on a beged that only has 3 tzitzis. But tefillin Shlita and tefillin Rosh are not Ma'akav, and that's a Mishnah. That tefillin Shlita and tefillin Rosh are not Ma'akav, and that proves it's 2 different mitzvahs. So let's come back to Sefiras HaOmer. So the Rambam proves Yomim v'Shavuos are 1 mitzvah and not 2. If there would be 2, we would say 2 brachos. And this brings us to a huge surprise, and that is Rabbeinu Yerucham. So Rabbeinu Yerucham says, Sefiras HaOmer, Yomim and Shavuos are 2 different mitzvahs. We don't have Sefer HaMitzvahs of Rabbeinu Yerucham. If we would have Sefer HaMitzvahs of Rabbeinu Yerucham, then in the list of Taryag there would be 2 slots for Sefiras HaOmer and not 1. Yomim and Shavuos. I wonder what he would subtract. But we could only guess, because he didn't write Sefer HaMitzvahs. So Rabbeinu Yerucham says 2 different mitzvahs. Why don't we say 2 brachos? And now he gives us a shock. And he says, Minyan HaYomim is min haTorah bizman hazeh. Minyan HaYomim does not depend on the Korban. Minyan HaShavuos does depend on the Korban, and that is why it is only midrabanan. And because it's a Zeichel HaMikdash, we don't say a bracha on Minyan HaShavuos, like we don't say a bracha on Koirech. So Rabbeinu Yerucham is the first, and I think the only one of the Rishonim that compares Zeichel HaMikdash of Ameimar, talking about Sefiras HaOmer, to Zeichel HaMikdash of Koirech. And just like you don't say a bracha on Koirech, because it's only a Zeichel HaMikdash, you don't say a bracha on Sefiras HaOmer. But according to Rabbeinu Yerucham, it is only Minyan HaShavuos that is Zeichel HaMikdash. And therefore we don't say a bracha on Minyan HaShavuos. Minyan HaYomim is min haTorah. What is not clear in Rabbeinu Yerucham, because Rabbeinu Yerucham is a parshan so his opinion is that a Baya or a Meimar. When a Meimar says Zeichel HaMikdash, does he mean to say Shavuos is Zeichel HaMikdash or both? Let's go through part of Rabbeinu Yerucham. Leil Sheni Shel Pesach Mevorchen Asher Kadeshon Mitzvah Sazon Al Sefiras HaOmer. V'teimahu Shahoy Eloi Loimer Al Sefiras HaYomim. Ki Sefiras HaOmer Einoi Shum Davar V'havelei Loimer Al Sefiras LaOmer O Al Sefiras HaYomim V'oid Lama Ein Mevorchim Shtei Brochos Achas LeYomim V'achas LeShavuos Sharei Shtei Mitzvos Hen V'en Ketfilin Shel Yosh V'Shalad Doimer Shnei Brochos Afinu Lo Sach Ben Tefillah LeTefillah Rabbeinu Yerucham was an Ashkenazi, and he maintained like Tosis and the Rosh Minhag Ashkenaz, we say 2 brochos on Tefillin. V'oid Eich Onu Soimchem Hayoim Yudalet Shem Beis Shavuos V'yom Chof Aleph Shem Shloisha Shavuos Hoyel On Eloimer Hayim Yudalet Yoim V'Hayoim Beis Shavuos, because it's 2 separate mitzvahs. When you say Yudalet Yoim Shehem Shnei Shavuos, argues Rabbeinu Yerucham, you're not counting the weeks. You only count the days. You say 14 days are 2 weeks. That's not called counting weeks. We should say Hayoim Arboas Hayoim V'Hayoim Shnei Shavuos. But saying Arboas Hayoim Shehem Shnei Shavuos is not really counting weeks. מה לנו לא אומר שהם שני שבועס, וכי אין אנו יודעים שיהיו ד' יום הם שני שבועס? ונראה לנו. This is the punchline. משום דכסוב שבע שבועס תספלחו, וכסיב נאמה מיום ויחם מסוים על התניפו, גם בשבע שבועס תמימו יסתיינו, נמצא שלא נכתב עשייס השבועס, כי אם גבי יומר, אבל סביס היומם, לא יקסיב גבי יומר. And that's why I stressed two different psukim. Psukim number 1, מיום ויחם מסוים על התניפו, שבע שבועס. Posek Tazayin does not speak about Korban Omer. So Yomim is not dependent on Omer, Shavuos is dependent on Omer. And let's move on to Rabbeinu Yerucham. ובזמן הזה אנו סופרים לשבועי זכר המקדוש. ובדובר של זכר המקדוש לבד, אין מבורכן עליו. מדדה והקריחה דליל פסח, והרובד זין של סוכס, או שנה רבה, ולכן אנו אומרים שם כך וכך שבועיס, שאין זו ספירה ממש. אילו היינו סופרים ממש, כמו שהיו בזמן האומר, היה נראה שהברוכה חוזרת, אף הספירה שבועיס, ולכן אומר נוחס, מצלמוניון ומצלמון שבוע, רוצה לא אומר, יומי מן התוירה. יומי מן התוירה. והמיימר מונה יומי ולא מונה שבוע, אומר זכר המקדוש, הוא פרש סביס השבועיס. אין אלא זכר המקדוש, ולכן לא ימונה שבועיס. אין ביחס היומים. So I don't understand. He seems to be explaining the opinion of a Meimar. So a Meimar maintains Shviras HaShavuos is only Zeichel HaMikdash. And that's why you don't count weeks. So how is it a Zeichel HaMikdash if you don't count? What exactly is a Zeichel HaMikdash if you don't count weeks? So he seems to be basing his opinion on a Meimar. Abai says, Mitzelemim Liyoyme, that's Mana Torah. Then a Meimar steps in and he says, Shavuos is only Zeichel HaMikdash. So is a Beni Yerucham explaining a Meimar? That seems to be the case. So a Meimar says, weeks is Zeichel HaMikdash. Because the weeks depend on Korb Moimar, and the base don't depend on Korb Moimar. So Sefiras HaShavuos is Zeichel HaMikdash, and therefore you don't count weeks. So how is it Zeichel HaMikdash if you don't count? So what does he mean in the last three words? Lo Yehoyamon Shavuos im Berkas Hayomim. Maybe he did count weeks, but not together with the days. When you say a bracha, you only say the bracha on the days. What about the weeks? Did he count weeks, but not together with the days? Maybe sometimes yes, sometimes no. Don't know. It's confusing. It's not clear. But what is clear in the Beni Yerucham? 2 points. 2 different mitzvahs, not one like the Rambam maintains. 2 separate mitzvahs. Number 2, Zeichel HaMikdash, you don't say a bracha. It's like koirech. It's not like lulav kol shiva. It's like minig arova in Oishana Rabba, which is also Zeichel HaMikdash, but you don't say a bracha. Number, what? There was. According to the Ben Yerucham, there were 2 brachas, Bizman HaMikdash. The only reason we don't say 2 brachas is because we only say a bracha on Yomim. We don't say a bracha on the weeks. Maybe, I know it's bothering you. Yeah. So I don't know what that means. Maybe it means you're choizer al the bracha. Or maybe the nusach habracha was asher kedushono b'metzois tzivano al Sefiras hayomim v'hashavuos shel HaOmer. For instance, Truma Gedola, Maser Rishon, Maser Shein, you have separate mitzvahs. What is the nusach habracha when we say when we're mafresh trumas v'maises? Al afroshes trumas v'maises. You don't say 2 separate brachas. But you do mention 2 separate mitzvahs. So I don't know. In the beginning of Rabbeinu Yerucham, he seems to argue, if it would be 2 mitzvahs, we would say 2 brachas. And then he says, a bracha chozeres al minyan hashavuos. Does he mean you say a separate bracha, or maybe when you say the bracha, you need to mention the 2 mitzvahs, like we find by Trumas HaMaisos. So these are the 2 relevant points in Rabbeinu Yerucham. Sefer HaOmer. So this is the same, but different. Yesh shoalim, ma tam ein ono oimrim boizman. Why don't we say Shechiyanu on Sefiras HaOmer? We say Shechiyanu on mitzvahs d'Rabbanan, Chanukah, Mikra Megillah. So why don't we say Shechiyanu on Sefiras HaOmer? It's once a year. Mizman lizman. And then he has 2 other shailas. One of the interesting one is shaila number 3 that he asks. In the days of the Beis HaMikdash, when they were Mekadesh HaChodesh al Pi Ariyah, there was Feikei D'Yomer. Probably all of you know why in Chutz La'aretz we have 2 days Yom Tov. Because in days of yore, going back to Yemei HaMikdash, people living far from Eretz Yisrael didn't know when Beis was Mekadesh HaChodesh. So they needed to keep 2 days Yom Tov. So how did they count Sefira? They probably counted Hayom Yom Echad O Shnei Yomim LaOmer. Second day they said Hayom Shnei Yomim O Shloshi Yomim LaOmer, because it was a Sveika D'Yomer, a Mitzvah D'Oraisa. So why don't we count a double Sefira, Mineg Avoseinu B'Yodeinu, just like we keep 2 days Yom Tov Sveika D'Yomer? And he answers one answer on both of these questions. Kloloi shel davar, 3rd line in Moir. Does anybody know what's the Moir HaKoton? The same Mechaber wrote a Sefer HaMoir HaGodol. Is anybody familiar what's the Moir HaGodol and what's the Moir HaKoton? What? Yeah, but which one is called Moir HaGodol and which one is called Moir HaKoton? Noshem Nezikin is Moir HaGodol, Moed Moir HaKoton. Why? I don't know. But he wrote on various Masechtas and Shas. Some are the Moir HaGodol, the others Moir HaKoton. So on line number 3, Kloloi shel davar, ein lanu lahachme b'Sefiras HaOmer, she'einei elo zecher ba'alma. He uses the same lashon, the same language as Rashi. Zecher ba'alma. And therefore, we don't say Shechiyanu. We're not makbed in Sefiras HaOmer. V'hocha sikne beduchtim b'menoches. Ameimer mone yoyma. V'loi mone shavoi. Ome zecher l'migdashu. V'afar pishonu mone yoma v'shavuos. Minegu b'yadeinu. Aval ha'atino izman. Ein lanu. Balamor paskins in accordance to a meimar. And obviously so does Rabbeinu Yerucham. But the difference between Rabbeinu Yerucham and a meimar is so obvious. And the Balamor says, why don't we say Shechiyanu? But it is clear to him that we say Berchas HaMitzvah, Asher Kedeshonu b'mitzvos v'tzivonu al Sefiras HaOmer. And he does not differentiate between days and weeks. According to the Balamor, the entire mitzvah is only Zeichel HaMikdash. If days would be Menatera, we would say Shechiyanu on the days. So the Balamor maintains Halocha Ka'meimar, and when a Meimar says Zeichel HaMikdash, it's all Zeichel HaMikdash. That's why we don't say Shechiyanu. So why do we say Berchas HaMitzvah? So obviously Berchas HaMitzvah, yes, but not Berchas HaZman, not Shechiyanu. And he says Zeichel HaMikdash ba'alma. It's not a real mitzvah. It's not a mitzvah gemura. So on one hand, Balamor is like Rashi. Why didn't the Meimar count the weeks? Because Zeichel HaMikdash ba'alma, la'av choivohi. And he uses the same lotion, Zeichel HaMikdash ba'alma. It's not a real mitzvah. And therefore, we're not machmas veke the yoima. We don't say berachas zman, but we do say a brocha. According to Rabbeinu Yerucham, of Zeichel HaMikdash, it's like koirech. So according to the Balamor, Zeichel HaMikdash, but more similar to lulav, not really. So why didn't the Mema say Shavuos? So it's somewhere in the middle, between Zeichel HaMikdash of lulav, Zeichel HaMikdash of koirech. So in Minchas Osher Chelek Gimel, I made a very powerful argument about why don't we say a brocha on koirech? Because Hillel HaZoken didn't say a brocha on koirech. Which brocha did Hillel make when he was koirech matzah v'morah v'yoichlin b'yachad? He made a brocha on matzah, he made a brocha on morah. So do we. We already made a brocha on matzah and morah, so exactly what brocha will we make on koirech? I wonder what havamina there is to make a brocha on koirech. So actually, Bisman Shabbos Hamikdash Oyakayim and Hillel ate matzah and morah together, what brocha did he make? Asher Kadeshonu b'mitzvah yitzvon al achilas matzah, and then Asher Kadeshonu b'mitzvah yitzvon al achilas morah. Second brocha would be a hefsek for the first brocha. The Rambam writes, Asher Kadeshonu b'mitzvah yitzvon al achilas matzah yisimroirim. Just like a froshes tumas and maises. When you makayim two mitzvahs together, you don't say two separate brochas, but you need to emphasize both mitzvahs. Al achilas matzahs and roinim would be similar to a froshes tumas and maises. But that's the reason we don't say a brocha on koirech. So you can't compare Sefiras HaOmer to koirech. We don't say a brocha on koirech because we actually already said the brocha on koirech. We said the brocha on matzah and brocha on morah. It's not like Sefiras HaOmer. So that's somewhat of a tzorachin on Rabbeinu Yerucham. So today we discussed in depth the concept of Yomim and Shavuos, Mitzvah lemimne Yom and Mitzvah lemone Shavuos. Let me just say this. We all know that the days of Sefira should be days of preparation. Preparation to Kabbalah Torah. Sefer HaChinuch writes, Sefira is all about Laharois benafshenu as a chayfetz hagodel sheyesh lanu al hayom hazeh, the special day of Kabbalah Torah. Ke'eved yishavtzel v'yesporat hayamim mosai yagia ho'eis hanichsaf, waiting for this wonderful day. And the Ran, at the end of Psuchim, quotes a medrash. When Klal Yisrael left Mitzrayim, they came every day to Moshe. You made a promise. B'tzeischem Mitzrayim tavdun es u'elakim al ha'ar hazeh. When will that be? We expect you to practice and to fulfill what you promised us. Where is Har Sinai? And HaKadosh Baruch Hu saw their thirst for Torah and how much they are waiting for Kabbalah Torah. So he said, I want to see this every year. And that's the mitzvah Sefiras HaOmer. So Rabbi Salanter demanded from his Talmidim, and we find the same in Chidush Harim, that asked his Hasidim. Every day of Yomei Sefira, Mem Tes Yomei Sefira coincide with Mem Ches Dvorim Shetorah Nikneis Behem. And that's in Perek Vav of Masechet Avos. So Minyan HaYomim is associated with the Mem Ches Dvorim Shetorah Nikneis Behem. What about the weeks? The Zohar in this week's parsha says, 7 weeks of Sefira coincide with Shiva Nikiyim de Zova. And just like a Zova Oila Metumah Letahara with Shiva Nikiyim, Klal Yisrael was elevated Metumah Letahara in the 7 weeks between Yetzias Mitzrayim and Kabbalah Torah, and that is every year. So in every siddur, after Sefiras HaOmer, there's a short tefillah Rabbeinu Shel Olam, and every day of Yomei Sefira is built on Sheva Sefiros. Does anybody know about Sheva Sefiros? Could anybody tell me what are the Sheva Sefiros? What are they? Chesed, Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, Malchus. Are there 7 or 10? Is anybody familiar with that? What? 7 or 10? How many spheres are they? Which are the other 3? Keser, Chochma, Bina. Keser, Chochma, Bina. So why don't we only have 7 weeks and not 10? What does Sefiras mean? What is Sefiras? The source of this concept is in Sefer Yetzirah. However, it's mentioned in Medrash Rabbah as well. And nobody really knows what does Sefiras mean. Does it mean numbers? Does it mean a story? Some say it means light. Sapphire is one of the precious gems which radiates. Nobody really knows what it is. But the Sheva Sefiros, or the Esa Sefiros, Reb Chaim Evoloshin says in Ruach Chaim and Weiss, are the same as Ba'asora Mamoris Nivrahu Olam, and that's the first Mishnah Perek of Weiss. So in the Loshen of the Gemara, of the Mishnah, of the Braisa, it is Mamoris. 10 times HaOmer Elokim in Parshas Bereshis. And in the language of the Mekabbalah, Mitzvah. And these are Tzenoris HaShefa, with which HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world, sustains the world, and that is how Shefa Eloki comes down from the heavens with the Sefiras. Is anybody familiar with Daled Oinamis, with the 4 worlds? I do not mean the planets. There are more than 4 planets, which they're not finished counting the planets. It's very fluid. Every few years they decided to add or subtract. But the 4 Oilamis are a concept in Kabbalah. And it's based on a posuk in Navi Yeshayahu. Atzilus, Bria, Yetzirah, and the physical world we are familiar with is Olam HaAsiyah. Kesach Chochmah Bina belong to Atzilus. We don't get up that high. We have no negia to Atzilus. And that is why our avodah concentrates on Sheva Sefiros. Kesach, Chochmah Bina are beyond our reach. But the other Sheva Sefiros are 7 days of Yom Tov, 7 weeks of Sefira. Daled Minim. How many? How many Minim do we have when we're Makayim the Mitzvah? Did you ever count? 3 plus 2 plus 1 plus 1. How many is that? 7. So the 7 Minim have to do with the Sheva Sefiros. And the Sheva Sefiros are one of the 10, out of the 10. So Gedolei Hasidus were Machadish, that these Sefiros are 2-way streets, not one way. And these Sheva Sefiros are Midas Benefesh Ha'odam, Midas with which we need to serve a Kodesh Baruch Hu and be Dovek on a Kodesh Baruch Hu. We serve a Kodesh Baruch Hu b'chesed. We serve a Kodesh Baruch Hu b'gevura, with Sefiras, Netzach is Torah, Hoid is the beauty of mitzvahs, Yesod is Kedusha Sabris, Malchus is Kabbalah Sol, Malchus Shemayim. So these Sefiras go both ways. When we serve a Kodesh Baruch Hu with these 7 midas, Shefa goes up, Meletata La'ela. And that inspires Shefa to come down, Ma'ela Letata. So those are the Sheva Sefiros that coincide with the 7 weeks. That coincide with Shiva Nekiyim. So part of our Achonat HaKabbalah Torah is avoida and midas and kedusha and tahara, and not only memches dvorim that are directly associated with the way you learn. So mitzvah lemimne yoyim and mitzvah lemimne shavua, whether they're 2 separate mitzvahs or 1 mitzvah, 2 inyonim. One is Yegiyas HaTorah, Darkei HaTalmud, but that is not enough. The other one is Dveikus and HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Tikkun HaMidas, which bring you closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which bring upon you a Ruach Tahara, in a Ruach Kedusha, serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu with everything you have, with all the Koiches and Nefesh that HaKadosh Baruch Hu bestowed upon you, with Chesed, Gevurah, Sefiras, Netzach, Yesod, and Malchus. Yerotzin Shechel Kenu Amor. We should come every day closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and ever closer to Kabbalah Torah. So these are days of preparation to Kabbalah Torah and Kabbalah Malchus Shemayim. Have a beautiful Shabbos.